Hi everyone, it's Natalie here, and today I've come on to talk about the Buddha Wisdom Shakti Power Goddess deck. So, this is a deck published by US Games. Nice box, as you can see. Really pretty. They're raising their game at US Games in terms of like beautiful packaging that's a lot more in harmony with what I think the community is asking for in terms of quality of printing and so forth. Before I start about the deck, as you can see, the artwork is exquisite. The artist is a very, very devout, dedicated practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism and Thangka painting. And so Thangka painting is a very specific style of painting artwork in the Buddhist tradition, specifically the Tibetan tradition. It's usually accompanied by some form of empowerment by a Tibetan Thangka painter and master. So it's not something that comes lightly, and it's usually studied over a very long time. And in fact, that is the case with this particular artist. She's a very prolific, beautiful, dedicated artist. I will be linking to her Etsy store. I did order these cards from US Games and not directly from her website, so I should say that. She has several Thangka paintings right now that are on my wish list. I'm hesitant to go ahead and pull the trigger on them, not because of anything to do with quality, price, any of that, or the absolute beauty of the work that she does. And my hesitance is coming really just from the fact that I'm in a sunroom. So if I put them up, I'm going to have to really, I have to be really mindful of where I put them. I don't want to bleach them out, damage them. They're not just prints and paintings. They're spiritual art. And then as I say that, I'm reminded that usually a Thangka is painted on a piece of fabric, which then is covered in brocade and then has, a shield on it, because at various different times in temples and caves and places where the Thangkas are kept in homes, there is sunlight. And so, while you're contemplating that particular deity, the veil is rolled up and tied into place. And then when you're finished, you roll it back down to protect the painting. So in order to house them properly, I would need to either invest in some solar, like UV protected glass, or I would need to figure out if it's possible to turn them into a Thangka of sorts, and how to do that. So really, it's logistics. It's logistics for me, and represents the investment of not just the actual painting, but also time and effort involved in making sure that I house it and protect it appropriately. So that's really the only thing that has stopped me, and I have every intention of following through on it and selecting at least 2, probably 3 or 4 from her collection that I really, really love. So I did want to say that first before I talk about the deck. So the artwork is coming from, again, this incredibly devout artist. And in fact, this is one of the Thangkas that I really feel drawn towards. This is a painting of a deity, or really a human bodhisattva called Yeshe Sogyal. And I didn't know much about her at all. I'd never heard of her until I began working with Tara Mandala last summer. but I have become drawn to her. And so learning about her and having her tanka is definitely going to be a part of my journey. She just has this incredibly mothering, beautiful energy that I feel is really, really well conveyed through the painting work. And again, the card does not do the artwork justice, as is often, I think, the case. When someone, I think we'd find that with a lot of deck artists, actually, if you were to look at original paintings and original works, where they're not digital, to start with, it's really stunning. It's kind of like the time I went to the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And I think I was about 22 or 23, and I'd only ever seen, all of his paintings and so on in really inexpensive posters. So that was really the only frame of reference that I had, was pictures, books, posters, etc. And when I went in to see the paintings in person, it just blew me away. And I fell in love with his work in a way that I never expected to, simply because of seeing the brush strokes and seeing the texture on the canvas, smelling not really the paint. They're too old to really have much of a smell to them, but just it's funny that I remember the smell, but there was a smell in that museum that was really fresh and new and yet really old, and I don't know, I just started to associate that particular smell with those paintings. And it was just a very visceral, real experience. There's also an energy that his paintings have that you can't experience. We get a taste of it, we get an essence of it through reproductions of them, but really you don't feel, it's really hard to explain because it's not really verbal, but you don't get the same feel of those paintings just by looking at reproductions. The experience of being face to face with them in person is so different. I've never been face to face with Laura Santi's paintings, but my sense of them is that it would be very similar. Very, very similar. Even without that, I feel like her artwork has the ability to convey a level of depth and contact with each of these deities in this tradition in a way that an artist not practicing in that tradition and not actively working with those deities wouldn't be able to capture at all. So I thought I wanted to open with that because I feel that is really important in first acknowledging before I go into talking about the deck itself. I should also say I've tried filming this particular review. I think this is my third or fourth try at reviewing it, and there was something wrong with the video each time I did it. Like it didn't record well, or I think the first time I just wasn't happy with the way that I spoke about the deck, the way that I talked about it, the way we looked at it, etc. And so I took a break. I got rid of all those videos. I took a break and decided to come back to it at a later time. So I'm making another attempt. So it should be said first that with this deck, I would call this a curated deck because the artwork existed long before the deck did. And I think that will also really inform the way that I speak about this particular deck and my personal experience of it. So in lieu of being able to afford the paintings, I thought, well, if I get the deck, that will give me access in some respect or other to the value and the beauty of those paintings as objects of divination, but also as objects of contemplation. The book that came with it is relatively small, very beautifully produced, And interestingly, there is this poem by Rumi on the back. And I've just come to accept that Western, I think most Western Buddhists and Western practitioners have started using Rumi and Hafez and Rilke pretty regularly. Yeah, there's a Rilke quote at the beginning, and I know I've seen some Hafez quotes in here. She does, whoever wrote the booklet, and I'm not really convinced that it was entirely written by Laura Santi, actually, but there are other quotes from other people, including her teachers, two of her teachers, who are very, very clearly very important to her and extremely influential in her artwork and the creation of her artwork. She lives in an enclosed community, so she is practicing at a very, very deep, very dedicated, devout level, as an artist and as a devotee. So I feel like that's an important thing to mention as well, because again, it will inform where I'm going with this review, or not even, I can't really call it a review. I haven't had them for that long. I guess it is kind of a semi-review critique of the deck and the cards. I'll just be honest. I think that it's not going to be possible for me to keep my own viewpoints and perspectives out of that. The back of the cards is exquisite. It is, it's just gorgeous. I love the lotus, and it's important to note too, we all complain about this regularly, but you can see on the very back at the, on the edge of the card, the copyright, the U.S. Games copyright in 2018 and so on, is obscured really by the painting. So I feel like that was really well done, because as you look at the back of the cards, you don't really see it very much. It's well hidden, but it's still there. And then as you look at the front of the cards, they are not in any way, tarnished is maybe not the word I want, but their beauty and your ability to connect with them is not interrupted by that copyright, which I actually really, really appreciate deeply about this deck. So some of the artwork, I think it's kind of in order of the stuff that I like best. So we have dakinis. So Vajra dakini. And at the bottom of each, and it's out of order because I think I put it in a particular order at one point for the reviews I was going to do and the way I was going to work with it. And at this point, it's moot. So the Blue Buddha family of the East, replace hatred through learning and wisdom. So she's got, the name of the deity, and then, undeniably wonderful depiction of them there. And then underneath of it, we get the connections, and in italics on the bottom of each card, you get the meaning. So there was Vajra, Ratna. I have to rearrange my stacking methods here. So there's Ratna, yellow Buddha Dakini of the South, replace pride by knowing that separateness is an illusion. Same thing, Padma Dakini, replace greed by cultivating discrimination. Translated a little bit differently in my tradition, but I can see where that comes from. All of these dakinis, and this is the final one of that series, there are 5, they're all part of the dakini mandala that I practice with. And I think this is the only complete mandala within this deck. So it's actually really, really pretty valuable to me, honestly, because I can use the cards very separately. Oh, there's no Buddha dakini. Where did she go? I can use the cards here she is, separately as a mandala practice. So there is that, which is helpful. And then move on. I think I put all the dakinis first because they're my favorite right now. So there's the fierce Furba wielding blue dakini. Beautiful. The ecstatic lion-headed dakini. And I'm not familiar with her. At least not yet. The red dakini that dances in Mahakala's heart. She's flirting with us, according to the guidebook. And then we get white Mahakala, the god of prosperity and wealth. Wish others wealth and happiness. Yours will come too. So let's talk about that, because I hear in my voice the kind of, there's a tone. While it's great, so here we go. So while it's good that we have, what each of them is, right? Now, in this one, I don't feel like this feels trite, right? The red dakini who dances in white Mahakala's heart, love is the most powerful force of all. That doesn't feel like overly trite or overly simplified. This does. Wish others wealth and happiness. Yours will come too. I feel like I'm reading the back, I'm reading a really bad fortune cookie, message. It just doesn't carry any of the depth. This is the problem with this particular deck. And this is why I also don't feel completely convinced that this is entirely the artist's work, because it just doesn't feel right. So for example, I feel like the following cards really, really help with this. I'll show them first, and then we can look at what it says in the book and talk further about it. So here we have a more traditional depiction of Kali, who is also referred to as Troma Nyangmo in Tibetan, and I believe, certainly in the Tibetan tradition, she would also be Vajrayogini. So Kali is really more the Hindu I want to say, I guess, iteration or variation of this particular goddess archetype. And then when she moves further north and into Tibet and into Vajrayana Buddhism, both in northern India and in Tibet, because it exists both places and existed both places, which is why you get language both in Sanskrit and in Tibetan. This is absolutely how she's depicted in Vajrayana. I've had some very, very powerful experiences with Troma Nyangmo, which are beautiful. I don't feel too bad about Goddess of Time and Conquer Ignorance and Delusion through Helping Others. That definitely expresses an aspect of what she does and how she is. And yet, again, I also feel like that is woefully oversimplified, and maybe even nice washed, actually. Compassion is a big aspect of who Kali Troma Nyangmo is. Well, I can't say Kali because I'm not working through that tradition. So I just want to be really, really specific and accountable about where I'm coming from. I'm working with Troma Nyangmo or Vajrayogini less so than I am with Kali. And there are differences in the way that she's depicted, in the way she's talked about, in the way she's written about, and even within Hindu, in the Hindu traditions, there are variations. So I just want to be clear, like that's the case. So we have practicing chud. It's got the little umlaut over the O, so it's pronounced chud, like book. Extend your awareness to the energetic edges or boundaries of the universe. Now, this is where I really start to begin where I started to kind of raise my eyebrows a little bit. Like, I don't know that. I mean, as a Tibetan practitioner, if I draw these cards, they will mean something to me for sure. Absolutely, are they going to mean something to me? I will know instantly, like, okay, that energy is there. I feel that. When I go to the guidebook, to be talking about deities and traditions, because there's more than one going on in here. She is mixing a lot between, I would say it's heavily Tibetan Buddhist, and then she's also mixing in some other areas of Buddhism and, yogic Hindu-based deities. So they're all kind of mixed in here together, and I don't know, again, how much of that is her intent and how much of it is the intent of the publisher and the editor. So this is what we've got written here. A practitioner sits down to do her sadhana. Playing her drum, she becomes lulled into another state. Eyes closed, she forgets herself, and her mind is transported to another realm. She visualizes dancing skeletons and offensive flames, vast worlds and expansive light-filled skies full of gods and goddesses, huge as mountains. Their many hands each hold an implement with the world of meaning unto self. Streams of offerings flow from cups. Ghostly spirits show up in the shadows. Millions of dakinis like flickering flames fill the air. The practitioner opens herself up to the universe and asks to connect to the energies of the other side of what her mind can understand. That has been edited, and I'm guessing not by Laura Santi, because frankly speaking, that is a gross oversimplification of what actually happens in the practice of Chud. Just putting that out there. This is nothing like what actually is dictated by the practice. Continuing, she steadies herself in the midst of the fierce ones' thunder and snarls. Or if they are sweet, tries to keep her seat. It's equal, which is what, again, sweet tries to keep her seat. I mean, that just doesn't, and it's not written in verse, but it's really not well written from my perspective. And I am a little, I definitely am. I'm being a little snarky here. So here comes some shadow stuff, guys. Teaching English and writing for years and years and years has both made me really open-minded and less judgmental when it comes to reading anyone's stuff, right? Because what's the point? But when you're looking to write something specific, or if you're looking to do writing that's meant to be put out to the public, there are standards, right? I don't know. It's not that it needs to be literary. I just feel like the writing, the editors that do this, even if it comes from the practitioner, let's say that it did come from her, it doesn't convey the level of depth that she has as a practitioner because words are not her best medium for expressing it. That's all. Editors and professional writers who work on stuff like this for publishers need to be held to a higher level of standard, honestly. Or someone else wrote it and they really didn't put the time, care, interest, into it, or they haven't into their own writing practice. This is not a sweet practice. I mean, there's nothing about this practice that's sweet. And the idea that it's just like a divination card in a deck that's meant for the general public, to me is just odd. I don't quite understand where that's coming from. But then even if you choose to do that, it's also very curious to me then that you would not, that the publishers would not, or whomever, the editors, wouldn't do a more careful job of wanting to describe it well and then boil that down into something that's a little bit more accessible, let's just say. But I feel like this description even misrepresents it. She steadies herself in the midst of the fierce one's thunder and snarls, or, if they are sweet, tries to keep her seat. It's equally difficult to look into brilliant eyes full of so much love that they melt your heart. Holding steady, she keeps a theme in her mind, a wish for healing illness, to grow as a person, or maybe just to understand. Just not at all, like, no. Okay, moving on. Before, quote, civilization invented the idea of going to school and getting diplomas, the Buddhists figured out another way to prepare for life. Meditation, visualizations, and pujas or prayers are a little like going to college. They are advanced study for the mind in preparation for further work. All the visualizations and the texts to be memorized are for the purpose of training the mind to become steady and strong. After this stage, the real training begins. That part does feel a little bit more like it's been filtered through the artist. That part does. Because it also holds a little taste of a voice that I've heard before coming from non-Western teachers of Buddhism who frankly find the West, teaching Western students very frustrating. The idea that we try to have a certificate for everything, the fact that we have to, all kinds of learning has to be validated by some sort of externalized, regulated structure. In the boiling down of all of that, we're losing something, right? And that's ironic because in the boiling down of this, we're losing something, right? We're losing something of tremendous value in trying to make it overly simplistic. The other issue that I have with this deck, in terms of using it as a divination tool, there's no real, what am I supposed to do with that information, right? So let's say I'm not a Tibetan practitioner. Let's say, I'm more of like a Western, witchy pagan practitioner who is really interested in some of these, Eastern deities and getting to know them better, right? Or let's say I'm a beginning yoga practitioner, Western yoga practitioner who wants to know more about this and incorporate it into their practice, right? I really don't think I would understand anything about what this card means, ultimately, after reading this, nor would I feel particularly good about myself either. When I read something like, after this stage, right, which seems unattainable, the real training begins. Again, it's not to disparage, Asian culture, right? It's to say that there's a big difference between the way Asian cultures view learning, training, etc., and the way that Western cultures do, okay? And it's vast. It's really vast. There's a lot to be said about this, but this type of mindset where, when you're learning with an Eastern practitioner, right, who is from Asia, who is Asian, the feeling that you have accomplished anything in that tradition combined with the mindset of like, no, only after you've done X amount of work will you be able to then move to something else, can become can become a shadow all its own for us as Westerners. And I think that needs a lot further examination. And when I hear Western practitioners adopt that tone, it can be a little bit alarming. And yet I also understand where it comes from. I absolutely understand where it comes from when you've done a really deep practice and devoted your life to that practice or to that tradition, and then someone comes along and adopts parts of it or dabbles in it or looks at it in a way that's really not can feel a little disrespectful after you've done that level of work, that shadow comes up. I mean, it just does. It doesn't mean that it's something that's going to be very helpful if you're writing a divination deck. Moving on with the rest of the deck. The Skull Cup, which is also part of Chud. And then we go in slightly different direction here because we're dancing with Ganesh. And Ganesh is really not part of the Tibetan tradition. Beautiful though, really beautiful. 8-armed Kuan Yin. And then 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. And it should be said that they're the same, essentially they're the same deity. Right now it's believed, they're both bodhisattvas, and right now it's believed that the Dalai Lama is the incarnation of Avalokiteshvara. And then we have the Sri Yantra. Again, cosmic map to your true, playful, laughing self. Just not quite. Maybe not even by a long shot. Okay, and I'm not familiar with the 4 guardian angels of which she speaks, so that's something that I'm very curious about. I love this one. Devotee offering his gift of song. Which is interesting because it's kind of not, it almost feels like it doesn't quite fit in this deck. And it's actually from another painting. Which makes me wonder, as several of these cards are pulled, including this one, are pulled from other, tankas. Tankas can be very, very rich and very complex and multi-layered. And I feel like probably what's happened is, in order to have as many possible deities and cards, and maybe even to balance the deck in some way, everything, they pulled out the publisher, whoever did, pulled the deck together, pulled everything out of the woodwork and, threw everything, including the kitchen sink, into it. And then didn't quite know how to make it useful as a divinatory device. Love this one. Weird too that the consort and the Buddha are not both mentioned. Because in Yabyum practices, and this is a Yabyum Tanka, both are mentioned. Because the two together are what makes the Yabyum. It's the duality. And the idea of duality in the middle of something that is ultimately non-dual. Love this medicine Buddha. The trees behind him. I mean, there's, again, the paintings themselves. Oh, I love her artwork. And they hold the depth and, her depth and her dedication and her level of study are, absolutely exquisite. And I do feel like as an artist, she brings together East and West in a way, that is really pretty remarkable. Padmasambhava. Very important in the tradition that I come from, which is Nyingma. A little bit of Kagyu. Working I'm smiling because I work a lot with Vajrasattva in my practice at the moment. If anyone out there is looking for more of someone to look at in terms of, or look into in terms of embodying divine masculinity, Vajrasattva is very healing on every possible level with that. And they've used Para, the ancient tantric mother goddess, for the cover of the book. Prajna Paramita. I'm not as fond of her green Tara as I wish I were. I don't know why. There are just other green Taras that I like better, I guess. I don't dislike this one. I'm just thinking in terms of like, I do really like her white Tara though. I really, really love Yeshe Sogyal. Again, a tanka that I really think I need to have. I just love that painting. Okay. And then again, we get some of the mandalas that she's made in here. Her mandalas are exquisite. And so this is the mandala of Vajra Varahi, who I'm not as familiar with. She is a Dakini, and she's in several cards here. And here she is again. There's like 4 cards, I think, that all relate to her. So clearly she's very, very important in Laura Santi's practice and her background. Love this one of Durga. When I was doing yoga, Durga was one of my favorite goddesses. And I had a yoga teacher whose name from the tradition that she'd come from was Durga. That was back when I was living in London. Cool. That's a really beautiful one. And that is not a goddess that I'm familiar with, but I really love that tanka. And finally, Tromanyangmo's Mandala Mansion. I also really love that one. Love, love, love. So yeah, so that's all of the cards. There are 50 altogether. That's really it. There are no spreads. She does, there is a reference list at the back. She does offer her story and her background and the history of tankas at the back of the book. You know, again, I hesitate to completely pan the deck because I do still intend to use it, but it's really, I mean, it's because I'm a Tibetan practitioner that becomes even possible. The cardstock is nice. It's very traditional, typical U.S. Games cardstock. You know, I kind of, if this were going to be a divination deck, I'd really love to see a lot of big improvements to it, not least of which is a much, much more in-depth, better written book that is much more keyed to the use of these as divination, you know, like a combination of cartomancy and oracle, which is often what you get with oracle cards is that kind of combination, you know, and even within tarot decks, you know, they're like with new tarot decks, if you're going to use them, you really have to get to know a whole new deck and system in the way that the particular creator has chosen to use the 78 in order to convey a message that is slanted or altered from the original intention, or the more widely accepted intention of the tarot. And I think I love it. Personally, I'm really fascinated by that aspect of things. But when I go to find an oracle deck, if it's something that, has the potential for holding a lot of depth and wisdom from different traditions, I feel like it really needs to reflect that. The writing, the book, the way that phrases are, written on the cards. I'm just like looking down, trying to find an example, and it needs more care. I'm really becoming very interested and fascinated with goddess decks as a result of, it's just not an area that I've really ever spent a huge amount of time in. I've of course, I've always been very interested in mythology and archetype, and a certain amount of goddess work that comes from just working in theater, training with Greek theater specifically. There's and then now working with the Tibetan tradition. There are a lot of things that I'm fascinated about with this. And I would say, too, I've had a few what I would call numinous experiences of goddesses, what I think are probably goddesses and goddess archetypes in, through dreams and life, and experiences. So, I am interested in it. I'm not as schooled or learned, in work with goddesses in the way that a lot of other practitioners are in any tradition, let's say. And I feel like the witchy community on, YouTube and in the tarot has a greater familiarity and sense of things than I do. And yet, just through having purchased this deck and attempted to work with it in a way that's functional, I have a much greater insight into the complaints and frustrations and concerns that have been raised, by various members of the community about the way that goddesses are being portrayed, about all of it, really, all of it. And I will say I did just order the Dark Goddess Tarot, by Ellen Lorenzi. I feel like it's 3 names, and I don't have them to hand at the moment, but I did order that. It should be in. I think it's in at my friend's house, and I just need to go collect it. But I'll be flipping through that. I have some insights to share. So there will be more to this dialogue. But for the meantime, I just wanted to share this particular deck and the thoughts I have about it. I won't be getting rid of it or trading it. I do find it really useful and wonderful to have for a variety of reasons. And I think if there were to be a better version of the deck put out that really reflects, a lot of the ideas that I put forward, that would be amazing. I doubt that will happen. But I think even from a marketing perspective, some of the things that I've raised are actually really valid issues. If the average practitioner can't pick it up and find a way to access it and use it, and it's then also not presented in a way that's helpful or maybe even respectful, that's a problem. That presents an issue. And then if an experienced practitioner of this tradition picks it up and feels insulted because the reflected meanings, or the meanings don't reflect the actual practices, or oversimplify the deities and goddesses to the point that it sounds like the person writing it doesn't actually know who they are, it's not only insulting to a practitioner of that particular background, it's insulting to the artist who originated the work. because I can tell you from I've looked at a lot of Tibetan tankas, a lot. The collection that Lama Tsultrim has at Taramandala is astounding. And they have a Tibetan tanka painter, Lama Yerme, who comes regularly and teaches and offers that transmission. So they have their own tanka painter that's part of that organization and tradition on site. So I can tell you without a doubt, the work of the artist is top notch. I mean, it is absolutely in harmony with the tradition, the lineage, the background, all of it. So then why doesn't the rest of the work involved in putting the deck together reflect that? It's really disservice to her work, because her paintings reveal a lifetime, 20, 30, 40 years of work put into not only creating artwork, but also understanding and connecting directly with these deities. And it's very apparent that that's the case. So there we are. All right. More later. Thanks, everyone.